Hey everyone, Mekkah here. Let's get this out of the way first. I'm a huge Fire Emblem fan. I love pretty much the entire franchise, and at this point, I think I finished 3 houses over a dozen times. I really enjoyed it, especially my first playthrough. This is not a video from the perspective of a hater, or someone who's looking to nitpick the game to death. This is a video made by a fan, pointing out why one part of 3 houses does not feel right. I have an opinion, and that's a fact. If you disagree with my opinion, that's fine. And if you disagree with the fact that that's my opinion, well, you're wrong, and I'm about to prove it. So, I feel like the conventional way of analyzing Byleth as a character is to attempt to answer questions such as: is Byleth an avatar? Is Byleth a self-insert? Is Byleth a real, silent protagonist? And while these questions can be interesting to delve into, I don't think they serve as an adequate way to get to the bottom of the character that is Byleth. All you're really doing is trying to craft a definition of what makes a character fit into one of these 3 boxes, and then seeing if that's the case for Byleth, but that doesn't really help us understand whether Byleth is a good character or an enjoyable character to play with or as. So while these aspects may come up during my analysis, I'm not really going to try to focus on them. Along with that, I'm also not really going to be focusing on comparisons to previous incarnations of the same character concept. We've had Mark from Blazing Blade, Chris from New Mystery, Robin from Awakening, and Corrin from Fate so far, and while Byleth borrows a little bit from several ones of these, I don't think just doing a comparison to these will get the job done. Byleth is sort of silent, kinda like Mark, and Byleth is sometimes treated as the center of the universe just like Corrin, but I think the best way to analyze Byleth is to look at Byleth within 3 houses rather than looking at how Byleth does or does not do something different or better than those other 4 avatars or self-inserts. I have made no secret of the fact that I think Corrin's influence on Fate is cringy as hell, so if I tell you that Byleth is better than Corrin in that regard, then does that really tell you anything new? I don't think so. I am also fully aware that a lot of aspects of Byleth are common tropes, but I don't think whether something is a trope in and of itself is an argument for or against the strength of Byleth as a character. I do think that if a game puts some clever twists on a trope instead of playing it straight, that's a good thing because I value originality. I'm not going to say this is bad because it's a trope, but I also don't think it's a good excuse for why things are as they are. So, with all that out of the way, let's actually look at Byleth within 3 houses. Apologies to all the girls out here, as I'm writing this I'm finding myself referring to Byleth as a he automatically, so that's what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the video, but I mean he/she. So my main qualm with Byleth is as follows: he takes me out of the story and he makes me wish he wasn't there. This is the opposite of what he's meant to achieve, and indeed the opposite of what he seems to achieve for a lot of people, as he's a proxy for the player. When most players have Byleth marry a character in 3 houses, they will refer to it in the first person. When the game was first advertised, it was straight up stated that you are the hero the world needs. And when a character interacts with Byleth, Byleth doesn't speak like other characters, but instead the player is offered a choice for Byleth's dialogue. I'm not saying these things are always objectively bad, I'm just saying why I think it's pretty obvious that Byleth is just supposed to be there for the player to insert themselves into, as opposed to a character like every other one in the game. I'll get to the specific part that I don't like in a bit, but I just feel like I need to make it clear I don't even mind characters that the audience can project themselves onto a little bit. One of my other favorite series is Pokemon, and that game takes all the silent self-insert protagonist things to a very large extreme, including the part where everyone thinks they're the bestest person ever. I will admit that isn't exactly my favorite part of the Pokemon series, but this example is just to show that it isn't generally a deal breaker for me. And while I've gone back to clearing stuff up, I think there's another misconception some people might have about me, which is that I don't get attached or emotionally invested in video games or media in general. Sometimes it might look like that when I play Fire Emblem, but the truth is that while Fire Emblem usually doesn't really invoke an emotional response from me, there are a couple moments that really got me. One of them that I can recall recently was watching the end of Generation 1 in Fire Emblem 4. If you haven't played that game yet, please do because it's amazing. I'm not going to show exact footage of what happens there, but rest assured it's amazing and it gets me every time. But I don't even have to use Fire Emblem as an example. The Harry Potter series, and especially its rich cast of characters, are really dear to my heart, and I still read those books regularly, despite their flaws. And I recently watched the entire Netflix adaptation of an unfortunate series of events. Slight spoilers incoming, skip ahead a bit if you care about this, but that scene where that flying mobile home flew away with the Quagmires on it but not the Baudelaires, that really touched me. In a series where these kids are constantly getting screwed over by the world around them, oftentimes when they're really close to finding safety, this moment was by far the saddest for me up to that point. Too long didn't watch for the last bit. I do care about story and characters, but I might be a little bit more selective on it compared to most people. So let's get back to Byleth. As we've established, Byleth is there to provide a direct way for the player to roleplay as and interact with the characters in the world around them, to give a larger deal of immersiveness. But to me, he does the polar opposite. I'm not sure exactly why this is more of a feeling than something I can point out a concrete cause for, but I have a couple reasons that I can think of. One or more of them might be it for me, and they could be the reasons for you too. Let me know if any of these resonate with you. Number 1, almost no voice acting. Every other character in the game is fully voice acted, including their cutscene dialogue, supports, tutorial lines, battle quotes, crit quotes, level up quotes, and so on. Byleth only has the last few things I named. The rest of them, he communicates through gestures or through these choice menus. So every time Byleth interacts with something or someone, some kind of switch goes off for me. I start having to read instead of being able to listen as well as read. And it just sounds and feels like the non-Byleth character is just talking to a brick wall. That doesn't really help. It's a difference, it stands out, and it takes me out of the game for a moment. Just having them voice acted would have made him part of the whole, and considering they did hire a voice actor and voice actress for Byleth, I think they could have just gone all the way here. I can see why they didn't, because him not talking out loud in these scenes makes it easier for players to imagine they're saying it in the scene, but I find the dissonance between full voice acting and suddenly having to read a line to take me out of the story. Number 2, I don't like the choices. So if you've seen the ship post I made, you might know that I like to make fun of the choices that don't really matter. I like it when the game gives me options to customize things a little bit, but generally if a decision doesn't really influence anything, then for me there is little point. Now I know that this is a bit of a divisive opinion because the comment section of that ship post was full of people who did like the choices. Here's some common defenses that I saw, paraphrased a little bit. Choices do matter, they impact support points. According to a post by a data miner I read a while ago, these decisions only impact 5 points. For reference, you need hundreds of points to raise a support depending on the level, so while they technically make an impact, it's very, very small. And raising your support with a character you never get to play with, such as Daryl, doesn't really do anything for gameplay to begin with. In real life, not every choice matters either, so it's realistic. Well, yeah, but this is not a real life or a simulator of it anyway. The developers can make their decisions, or choices that do not match real life, if it makes the game feel better or flow better. They are not forced to go with something realistic in every regard. You can't make every choice matter, there would be too many branches. Of course not, which is why for me personally I'd rather have the choices not be there rather than having all of them have an impact. I prefer to have 2 concrete, defined and consistent characters interact with each other rather than what we've got currently. Don't get me wrong, I do understand the other side of it. People like role-playing as themselves or as Byleth in the story, and for them it adds to the immersion. It's a bit of self-expression. They like to feel as if they're the ones talking to their favorite characters, but since I don't like Byleth and I don't see myself as Byleth, this part falls flat for me. It doesn't help that the choices are limited the way they are either. Sometimes they come down to the exact same thing, and sometimes they will be very different but the character responds to them exactly the same, or sometimes they'll be the opposite but the character just kind of defaults to one option, maybe scolding you a bit. If the only purpose of a choice is to make the player feel like they're expressing themselves but nothing significant changes because of them, then to me there isn't really enough of a justification to have them there in the first place. Number 3. Super awesome Byleth, center of the universe. But what puts me off the most by far about Byleth is the amount of worship they get. It feels like a very thinly veiled excuse to make the player feel good about themselves. Now, previous avatars got a lot of flack for this, and rightfully so, but I want to clear up one weird misconception about this. Corrin was and is especially hated by a large portion of the fanbase for everyone around him praising him and making him commander of the army and everything because it made little sense. There were more qualified people around. This was a sensible criticism, and I will admit it does not apply to Byleth because in-universe, Byleth is actually very qualified. He goes from a successful mercenary to a capable teacher, a sound tactician, and at some point he even merges with a goddess. In most routes, Byleth serves as a banner for the oppressed to unite under against the Empire, so in-universe there is nothing inherently wrong with most of the characters praising the ground that Byleth walks on. He has done some amazing shit. But just because the avatar jerking is justified within the story does not make it an appealing way to write a character. To me, it still feels like the game is just sucking up to me because it's such an easy way to give players a good feeling when they play the game. It's like a shortcut. You are Byleth. Byleth is good. Implicit message, you are good. So in the end, to me, it's all one big unearned compliment. There's been some pretty big avatar jerking in previous games too, but none of the other games had the audacity to actually literally fuse them with a goddess. The game is one simple step removed from actually saying, hey player, you are a god. It's not very subtle. Now the fusion with the goddess is just the most egregious part of it, but the game does a lot of things to make Byleth seem special. Like the fact that they have the super hidden Crest of Flames and the ability to wield a sword called the Sword of the Creator. Or the fact that he's capable of supporting with the entire cast and anyone can bond with him and even marry him. And he can make almost everyone change classes and stick with him throughout the war. The Lords rely heavily on Byleth for emotional support, and when Byleth is not with them, a lot of them end up in a really bad place, which is the way the game shows us how badly they need Byleth's help to be stable. I can buy that a person can make a big difference in how your life plays out, but at the same time, I think that person could have just been someone who's already with them, and we could have seen the Lords bond with some of the more interesting characters. Instead, that role was given to Byleth, and almost everyone else is relegated to standing in a circle and relating to the current situation to the tune of their most notable character trait. Now, to be fair, I know the current set of retainers isn't ideal for the situations the Lords are in. Hilda, Hubert, and the Dew each have their own character flaws and setbacks that stop them from really being able to get their Lords on the straight and narrow, so they would have to be rewritten too. Or you would need to lift up the importance of another character from their house. The Blue Lions, for example, have no shortage of characters that could have fulfilled this role of Dimitri's therapist between Gilbert, Rodrigue, Dimitri's childhood friends like Sylvain, Felix and Ingrid. I find each of these characters a lot more interesting than Byleth personally. My favorite option would have been to just let the Dew play a bigger role instead of keeping him off the screen for so long. Man, they really did the Dew dirty in this game. He was one of my favorite parts of the Blue Lions by far. But generally, I think most of the scenes of Byleth interacting with the main lords would have been more interesting if he was replaced by another character, since scenes between a lord and Byleth either tend to focus on avatar worship or they're just exposition dumps. I think the worst example of things revolving too much around Byleth by far is the events that happen between Part 1 and Part 2. The main cast, no matter which route you pick, pretty much stands around and accomplishes nothing at all until Byleth comes back around to meet them after 5 years. Byleth is so important to them that they didn't feel safe doing anything until he resurfaces. When other characters are bending over backwards like this to accommodate Byleth's importance, I think it's safe to say that something is wrong. Number 4. Byleth is just weird, man. A couple of things just feel off to me about Byleth. Little things that kind of contradict each other. Now, I'm not going to call these plot holes or writing errors or whatever, but just things that kind of make me go, huh. Things that I questioned a bit when going through the game for the first time. I think the biggest contradiction with the character of Byleth is how on one hand he's portrayed as a mostly silent, emotionally stunted doofus without a clue about himself or the world around him, while on the other hand he's apparently a very competent teacher who is able to bond with all of his students and rally all of his troops when going into the important battles, often against a big scary empire. When I look at the way Byleth behaves in all these cutscenes, he just doesn't seem all that smart or charismatic. I'm okay with him being competent enough to teach his students all kinds of things about the battlefield, but I think it's fair to say that teaching requires a fair bit of social competence as well, and he just doesn't seem to have that. Now, you'll never hear me say that Byleth actually has no personality at all. Being stoic or quiet can be a personality trait, and I will admit that Byleth does go through some changes here and there. Other characters do remark that he starts to show more emotion, and there is a tiny bit of development in there, but overall I don't think he's fleshed out all that much. In conclusion, while Three Houses was a huge relief for me compared to Fates, I personally liked the game despite Byleth rather than because of Byleth. I know that a lot of people really like role-playing as themselves in this game and pretend they build relationships with all these characters, but to me, this guy, again sorry, really takes me out of it every time. I think it works for a lot of players because they are used to this kind of thing in other games, and I think it can work well in other games, but in a dialogue-heavy game like Fire Emblem that is so focused on the story and the characters, having a mostly silent protagonist just doesn't work. I think Fire Emblem dialogue flows best between two people who have things to say to each other, have stories to tell, have some contradicting views, flaws to overcome. Byleth, well, he doesn't emote very much, and eventually he just does it a little more because of things that happen. Even though in a way the story of Three Houses follows Byleth and in a way revolves around him, Byleth has no real agency. He just kind of gets pulled to the monastery and the reins are mostly in the hands of other main characters. He just kind of comes along for the ride. There are some decisions that he's got to make, some really important ones in fact, but generally I feel like he just follows the path of other, more interesting people. Please note that my criticism here is not that Three Houses should have been choose your own adventure, or that kind of thing, where every little decision dialogue matters. I get that would have been way more than they could handle. I would argue this game was already more than they could handle. What I am saying is that Byleth is, for the most part, pretty bland and uninteresting, unlike the many other characters in Three Houses, and it's a shame that so much of Three Houses revolves around him and he has so much significant screen time. If you like projecting a bit of yourself on Byleth, if you like to roleplay as them, then that's cool, but I hope you understand my perspective that this is far from the most interesting way to make a protagonist. First of all, because it's been done so many times before, that of its own isn't a bad thing, but I don't think it's a valid argument in his favor either. But second of all, because if the player has to add their own personality to a character to make them likable at all, then that basically means they put an empty husk in the game for you to fill in. And I can't help but think of it as a coloring picture being sold to me as artwork. Hopefully that analogy clears up my point here. In my opinion, Fire Emblem works best when it's a story with interactions between characters with a real dynamic. Anytime an avatar of some kind gets involved, best case scenario it just distracts a bit, but in the worst cases there's a lot of avatar worship that can feel pandery or unnecessary. I don't play these games to be told how awesome I am. I want the game to tell and show that it's an awesome game. It's kind of like I'm a teacher and I ask a student to hold a presentation on something they're passionate about, and they just end up sucking up to me for 15 minutes. Like, thanks, but I wanted to hear what you had to say. For this reason, it is my hope that after 3 houses they will discontinue the self-insert thing in Fire Emblem. It doesn't seem very likely at this point, considering how much of a success it is, but hey, a man can dream. Thank you for watching my video on Byleth. Let me know down below how much you agree or disagree. I know this subject can be a bit touchy at times, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask that you remain civil in the comment section. And while you're down there, please customize the hair color of the like button, you can only pick blue, and subscribe if you haven't already, so you can watch more vids of mine in the future. Peace, and goodbye.